So part of being a social worker is being an advocate. And the only way you can be an advocate is if you stay on top of contemporary events, current events. And one way that I do that is through my Twitter feed. And I admit, and you'll certainly learn, that true to my profession, I tend to lean more toward the Democratic side on most current issues. My political bend is certainly progressive, liberal leaning, and that will be reflected in the kinds of Twitter pages that I do follow. And I do follow news, I follow culture, I follow sports, I follow music, I follow TV and films and movie stars, and so it's a sort of a full range of things you might see reflected on my Twitter page. But what I want to do probably once a month, because I have opinions, I have my 2 cents that I like to weigh in on, that I'm going to just scroll through some of my Twitter feed and just extemporaneously give you my sense of things, and hope you'll just better get to know sort of what some of my opinions are around some of these issues. So, um, straight off the bat, you can see there's politics, uh, way too much advertising in Twitter, as all social media. They got us sucked in, right? Like they get you like Facebook and Twitter, like in the beginning, like no ads, no nothing. And boy, now they got our number and they sure use their algorithms to target us advertisements. Like I get ads all the time for, music and events and clothing and different sort of diet programs. And I mean, they just know my number. Well, today is election day, and it's election day all over much of this country. And I'm a firm believer in voting. As an African American and as a woman, we've certainly come by this right and privilege through the sacrifice of many people before us. So I always take election day really seriously, and even my mother, like up until the point where she recently passed with Alzheimer's, but up until the point that she was still able to uh, have full cognitive ability, my mother voted. Even when she could barely walk, my mother voted. We did absentee ballots. Voting's essential, and whoever you vote for, to me, I mean, it matters. It should be based on the issues that you care about. I hope you aren't voting because of fear or because of being ginned up on hate. But we certainly should be voting our interest, whatever those interests are. And I guess, that's a very big discussion about people's interests. Certainly, my interests are for a more just and equitable and fair world. My interests are for the most vulnerable of people to be provided for. My interests are for everyone to pay their fair share of taxation so that we can have the programs and infrastructure we need in this country to keep everybody safe and to be living good lives, happy lives. So, I voted today and I voted my interest, and I hope other folks are doing that as well. Um, Lots of stuff in the news about, the House impeachment inquiry. I hope people are watching this. I mean, I'm one of those people that read the Mueller report. I follow what's happening in Congress. I'm very concerned about what's happening with the office of the presidency. I'm very concerned about the kind of what I consider to be abuse of power. But certainly, unlike any other president certainly in my lifetime, perhaps in modern history, with the exception of George Washington and some of the earlier presidents, like we're really coming to understand the kind of enormous power that has been given to the person who occupies the presidency in this country. And we also have come to understand more critically the importance of checks and balances between all the different branches of our government, that's essential so that not one part of our government, the judiciary or the legislative or the executive branch, would have more power than the other. Like the checks and balances are critical. And that's really how I see this impeachment inquiry. I see it as sort of, you hear the word constitutional crisis being banted about quite often. And I do think we're in that, or we're near that, in that we need to understand the boundaries upon which a president can operate. I mean, is it in fact true that a president could commit a crime in full view? To use the example of the current occupant of the White House, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and be without consequence, like no investigation, no interrogation, no arrest, no consequence for committing a murder in broad daylight on another citizen in our country. I mean, is that in fact true? Is that what the founding fathers envisioned about the kind of power that the person in the role of president should have in this country? And uh, I think that's really what's at the heart of this impeachment inquiry, is really coming to understand what the boundaries are around all that. I mean, we've had a couple of other impeachments in our nation's history around, Bill Clinton with the sexual act and his lying about it, which was a crime to lie about his act. It wasn't a crime for two consenting adults to have an affair. I mean, that's a matter for Bill Clinton and his wife to deal with, and that's a quite private matter that became embarrassingly and shamefully public. But what rose to the level of crimes and misdemeanors for Bill Clinton was the lying to Congress about it, the lying about it. And certainly with the impeachment of Richard Nixon, and his eventual resignation, had to do with stealing, the Watergate tapes, and again trying to get information about his opponents, which is really at the root of the current impeachment issue as well. So I do follow this closely, and most people I connect to on Twitter are people who are political people, who are analysts, who have political opinions, some of which I agree with, others I don't. And with Twitter, you can make a comment, you can retweet it, you can say how much you love a particular comment. And it's when you go into the comment sections for any of these particular feeds on Twitter, that's where you get sort of a fuller understanding of people's reactions to the particular uh, piece of information that someone puts forward. Like this David Corn person, he's listing something specifically about Mick Mulvaney being requested for deposition, and he's the chief of staff for Donald Trump. And you'll have people weighing in on that, and I can make comments too, of course, um, but I rarely do, actually. I just sort of read. Well, anyway, but that's how it is. I don't know. You all use Twitter? I mean, I think it's interesting. You certainly have to have a computer or a smartphone to do it. It is a way a lot of people share information right now. I mean, we basically have an occupant in the White House right now who you know, uses Twitter as a way to communicate with people, to advance his policies. We certainly know he advances all his grievances that way. I mean, I think, and again, in our lifetime, we've never seen such a thing. We've never had social media like this before. So it's quite a very interesting time that we find ourselves in. All right. So, some of my favorite authors are here. And then, more advertising because that's what Twitter does. Although, interesting enough, Twitter did say recently that they are refusing to accept political ads during this election cycle. And I thought that was a very, very principled position for Twitter to take, in contrast to the Bezos at Zuckerberg, rather, at Facebook. I mean, as you know, he gave testimony recently in Congress. He was questioned by a committee. Really, his attempts to try to put guardrails and regulations on these social media platforms that, are quite influential. And they're also very flawed platforms. As we know, our FBI and CIA proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that fake fake Facebook um, names, they call them bots, were generated principally out of Russia, where they just like created usernames on Facebook, and then they would uh, post all kinds of antagonistic and political vitriol on Facebook. A lot of disinformation, a lot of conspiracy theories. And Facebook basically was like, we have no responsibility. It's just free speech. Everybody can post what they want to post. And, people have mixed feelings about that. So anyway, Facebook's decided to take paid political ads, even in the case where they know the ads have false or inaccurate information, advancing conspiracy theories and the such. That even in those cases, Facebook's going to take the money and let them run the ads and let them have access to the millions of people who are users on Facebook. And I, quite frankly, have made a decision personally that I'm giving up Facebook. I'm deactivating Facebook on principle because I believe that that's not the way to go. I think that to purposely peddle misinformation, disinformation that has such large consequences is reckless and irresponsible. And so I'm more of a Twitter person. I still get my information from Twitter. I get to hear other people's point of views. I get access to reports and newspaper articles and great work of journalists all over the world. I get to track the interests that I care about. And Twitter and the CEO of Twitter, as I said, made the decision they will not engage in accepting political ads because they understand the recklessness associated with that. So kudos to Twitter. I just think that that's really awesome. You're also going to notice on my Twitter feed, I just have lots of stuff about animals. I don't know about you, but when you feel like you're on the brink of like nuclear annihilation because the occupant in the White House is stoking, and fomenting threatening the Korean Peninsula or doing what he's doing in the Middle East or whatever. Like sometimes you think about climate change and the forest fires burning in California. Sometimes you just have to have a counterbalance to that. And one of my counterbalances is animals. So I do have quite a lot of um, I watch a lot of videos about beautiful pets and dogs and cats and that sort of thing. So you'll see that on my Twitter feed quite a lot, actually. Um, I also go to theater quite often, and you'll see a whole lot about various shows on Broadway and off Broadway, and it's a good way to get good information about what's happening in the theater world. In fact, uh, uh, I just recently went to the Met Opera and I got to see Madame Butterfly. This current production is amazing. So, shout out to the Met Opera and that beautiful, beautiful performance of Madame Butterfly. I think on November, I think occasionally they now have Met Opera in cinema in the movie theaters, so you don't have to pay like big dollars to go sit in the Met, but you could pay $10, $11 and surround sound and go to a local theater and listen to some of your favorite operas. Yeah, more stuff about Donald Trump. Yeah, and then like lots of stuff about sports. I like following the NBA, the WNBA, the Women's Basketball Association, tennis, football, though ever since the Colin Kaepernick issue happened, I really haven't watched football like I wanted to. I do believe in social justice, and I do believe these high-paid athletes who have platforms and who, whether it's Tim Tebow or Colin Kaepernick, lots of high level pros venture into the political arena. Some get more consequence than others. But sports is a very big part of my life. I was an athlete myself when I was little young. Went to college on a sports scholarship, actually, as well as an academic one. So sports is a unifier, and you become a fan and you're surrounded by other fans in your home arena. There's nothing more wonderful in terms of the feeling of that, right? I'm sure y'all can relate to that out there. I know I got Jets and Giant fans and Cowboy fans and Knicks fans and Yankees and Mets fans in our viewing audience. Nothing like being a fan. I mean, that's like the whole world can, you just take a total escape from what's happening in the world when you have a good competitive sports match, whether it's soccer or tennis or golf or some of the other sports, right? Yeah. So, wow, it's an interesting piece from Anna DuVernay. She's the director who did the film about the Central Park Five, and she did the film about the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. And now it looks like she's promoting a protege of hers. So when she was 19, she was a sophomore at UCLA and waitressing at a soul food cafe for tips. When Philip Yeomans was 19, his debut feature, Burning Cane, opened in theaters via Array Now and debuts on Netflix tomorrow. So here's a film she's promoting about a young man, by a young man named Philip Yeomans. And her films are quite poignant. Um, and they really, from the lens of the African American experience, really, I always feel so much when I watch one of her films. So that's something to be looking out for. And I have Netflix, so it's certainly something I'll be able to watch. I actually just went to the movies and saw Harriet yesterday. That's the film about Harriet Tubman. Oh my God. What an amazing film. Um, wow. She was fearless. She was inspired. She was an amazing woman. And I learned so much about her and her family and the times that she lived in. And what an extraordinarily faithful person. I hope you get out to watch that film. I had a really nice conversation with two elderly white women afterwards, and we were all very moved by the film. We walked each other out to our cars and just really uh, touched your soul. Obviously, watching a hard film about slavery is never easy, but when you meet a heroine like Harriet Tubman, and for me as a black woman, I think, oh my God, that's what's in my genes. That's what's in my DNA. She's one of my ancestors, one of my, that strength courses through me. And I think everybody can relate to that, regardless of what your ethnicity is, that you can relate to a heroine as a person who is such a moral beacon. in a time where morality was so skewed and so turned on its face, like slavery was good and the fight for freedom was bad. In a country that was founded on the fight for freedom and emancipation and liberation from tyranny. And yet the institution of slavery occurred in this country. And to have someone like her and the whole network of anti-slavery abolitionists that she connected with when she made the 100-mile trek from Maryland to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the way she freed her family. I mean, it's something like 70 people or so she did that march with. She escaped to freedom and then went back and brought more people, her family and others, to freedom. They called her Moses because she was setting her people free. And then, she actually worked on the side of the Union in the Civil War. And under her leadership, one of the only, I believe, women who led a brigade, who led a raid of civil Union soldiers into battle, which ended up freeing over 750 slaves. The power of one woman. Oh my God. I do hope you get to go see that film. It was quite amazing. Yeah. Wow, Jimmy Carter. When former President Jimmy Carter learned that cancer had spread to his brain, he didn't pray to live. Instead, he prayed for a proper attitude toward death. Wow, 95 years old, still building homes for the poor, still in the South, still preaching justice, still a spiritual leader and a moral leader. Wow, Jimmy Carter. He's going to go down in history, I believe, as sort of one of the great presidents. I mean, the 70s was an interesting time to be president in this country. And he had, some failings, big policy failings, of course. But my God, after he left office, uh, his truest colors, in my opinion, shone bright as a leader in the world for peace and justice, for humanity, and his care for the poor. And I read a biography about him, and he was called the N-word lover. He was harassed in his small Georgian plantation town because he cared about. He had friends that were blacks. He knew early on how wrong slavery was and racism was, and um, and he took that position because of his faith, his Christian faith. And I don't know, that's the Christian faith that I believe in. I mean, this Christian faith that is rooted in hate of the other, and that, there was a picture of Donald Trump with all of these evangelical Christians laying hands on him, calling him the Messiah. Paula White, one of those evangelicals, was just hired onto Trump's advisory team. I mean, I just don't get how you can say you're a Christian and then enact policies that hurt people, like Latinos, and to have cages at the border with children in it, to not care about the earth, to really be padding the pockets of the wealthy and cutting social programs, food programs, and things like this. Like, I don't know how you square that. Certainly, the hate and vitriol against people of color coming from this current occupant in the White House, and to do all that in the name of Jesus, to me makes a perversion of what Christianity is. But lots of people hold that view, and I suspect that it's really the fear underneath, not sort of that's really driving all that. But when you think about Jimmy Carter, to me, I feel like he's quite a representative of the Christian faith and how he lived his life. How he lived his life. Um, and I'm not surprised to read this. He prayed for a proper attitude toward death. What a gracious, evolved, actualized person. I just think it's amazing. Well, I think that's all we have time for today on my Twitter rant. I'll look to do this again. And thanks so much for tuning in to Dr. Milton's Social Work Show. Remember, social workers concern themselves with current events. That's what we do. We concern ourselves with what's happening in the world. We are trained in social welfare issues. We have a voice and a say. We have to stay up on current issues, and we have to look at things from all points of view. You know, but having said that, we do have a code of ethics, and we do have a set of values that really keep our eyes on the long-term plan of social justice, of really making sure the needs of the most vulnerable are are met in our country. And and I think that's why a lot of people go into the profession, because that's their interest. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll look forward to you on the next episode.